I think there's an understanding of what the risk is that you are willing to take to enjoy the beauty of this area. And I think there's a growing understanding that the beauty of this area is that you're taking risks. And that if we didn't, if we were all billboards and empty beaches, nobody would be here. So really understanding that what brings the beauty to this place is the wildness, is the rewilding, is what brings people here, is pretty incredible. Over the years, I would say since the beginning of the 2010, so that first decade, we started seeing an increase in both seals and sharks, both species together, white sharks in particular, and gray seals, the species of seals that we saw rising. And we started seeing more conflict issues, first with fisheries, and working with colleagues that are doing white shark work. We all started reporting sightings of bites on seals or sightings of white sharks. And we just started seeing this increase in tension that was building. And through that time, actually put together a consortium called the Northwest Atlantic Seal Research Consortium to address some of these concerns that were arising. And that happened in 2009 and officially in 2013. So just to give you that background, there was a lot stirring, there was a lot brewing. And then in 2018, there was the death of an individual on the Cape Cod National Seashore due to a shark. And that really changed the perceptions and what people were hearing about what was happening in our ecosystem.
Over the last few years, we know that sharks are in the media all the time. The seals aren't so much, but there's a lot happening here with the seals. You know, our local fisheries, they're not always in the media. But all of these living things here are connected. So this study was to get a better understanding of what do people actually know about the wildlife here? How did we get to where we are today with our wildlife? You know, through human interactions and conservation efforts. So it was really to get that baseline, that understanding of what does the public know, as well as how does the public feel towards all of this wildlife.
I would say the study really began maybe a decade ago of trying to actually understand who are the players on the Cape when it comes to coexistence issues. And Jennifer Jackman was a central figure in the communication as she really had an interest in seals in our region and understanding the human dimension, data sets that can come out of trying to understand how to solve conflicts.
So within this study, the stakeholder groups were licensed fishermen in the region, registered voters, as well as tourists.
Working with the fishing community, you know, the fishermen have a variety of different types of interactions with seals, and, you know, it can range from depredation, where seals take fish off of a hook and line or out of a net, to bycatch and entanglement, where you have a seal that might get caught in a net and drown, or might tear off a piece of a net, take it with it, and remain entangled in that bit of net. So these are what we call sort of operational interactions or technical interactions between seals and fishing gear. And those can be responsible for a level of mortality of seals. Those can also be really responsible for economic losses for fishermen in time and labor costs to deal with damaged gear, and of course lost and damaged catch. So those interactions are definitely problematic for fishermen.
There's definitely realities when it comes to seals competing with fisheries. And when you deal with the weir fishery especially, there's definite impacts because everything is such a closed system. So it's a buffet. You're basically creating a system where anything can come in and take, I guess you could say. And it's in the same place all the time. And one thing that we know about seals in particular is that they're very smart and they'll figure that out very quickly unless you have a deterrent or some way to keep them from coming to your weirs.
What was really cool about the findings from this project is that whether you're looking at the tourists or the residents or the commercial fishermen, the answers are not as polarized as one might think if you were to base it on what you read in the media. It was very, everyone was willing to take, some responsibility for like the ecology of the ocean. They wanted more education. They wanted marine wildlife to thrive.
So looking back over time, there are a lot of pieces of historical evidence of white sharks in the Cape Cod region. So there are photographic evidence of white sharks getting caught in weir nets. We have writings from folks such as Henry David Thoreau, who talks about white sharks in this region and the observations from mariners or fishermen who are out on the water and are seeing the white sharks. So we know that they have historically been in this region. What happened over time is they did suffer a population decline. And so we did start to see their population numbers decrease as a result of being caught as bycatch, meaning that, folks who were out fishing for other things unintentionally caught white sharks. And once they were caught in the nets and everything, the white sharks died. So there was some loss in their population numbers from that, as well as recreational fishing. So folks who are not going out for commercial reasons, but who are going out, which was often trophy hunting. So that could have been from some of the big shark fishing tournaments that happened in different places, but going out and targeting white sharks and killing them, oftentimes for their jaws. Their jaws were really sought after. And so that resulted in a population decline. And once folks realized that we had this decline of white sharks, protections went into place to try to recover the population. So white sharks are protected both federally and at the state level. And what we are seeing here now is, really a conservation success story. Because protections have gone into place for white sharks, we are seeing their population numbers come back.
I think people should know about marine wildlife in general. It's not just seals. And my desire to study seals is born from the fact that they were extirpated from these waters because of government-sanctioned bounties in the late 1800s through the early 1960s, and through state laws and federal laws, they've had the ability over just under 50 years to repopulate southeastern Massachusetts and beyond.
Yeah, this study is a human dimension research study, and the way that I like to think about it is putting empirical data behind what we think of things that don't necessarily come across as having empirical data, but it does, and that's the social science aspect of science. What are the perceptions? What are people thinking? How can you quantify that in a way that we can actually use that for management, for education, for policy, so that we can have directives be more approached in a way that are effective communication strategies rather than what we think might be the best approach based on what we hear in media.
But it was really cool to put some numbers to it. I think we all sort of have commonly held beliefs about what fishermen think or what tourists think, but to actually put some real numbers to it, I think is really valuable.
As we see the white sharks as apex predators in this environment, they are connecting, helping to maintain that balance, working from the top of the ocean food web all the way down. And what a lot of people don't realize is how connected everything is. And it's not just sharks are eating seals. Another really exciting fact that we know about white sharks is their diet will actually change over time. So when they're younger, they'll go after more squid, smaller bony fish, and it's as they become more of an adult, they mature, that's when they'll go after some of the larger marine mammals. So it's not just that white sharks are eating seals. They're connected to many different things in our ocean food web. When we talk about, shark and human interactions, we can say there is no shark species anywhere in the world who has human as a part of their diet. And when we are looking at white sharks, especially these adult white sharks, they are looking for a larger food source. Many of the white sharks in this region who are fully grown adults, they are feeding on gray seals that can be anywhere from 400 to 600 pounds. They're looking for a meal that is rich in blubber. That gives them the nutrients that they need. And
in this case, what we were really trying to pin down is how are people responding to the fact that both white sharks and seals are repopulating southeastern Massachusetts. They're rewilding this area. And with that comes changes, right? We have to think about now that we have a return of mesopredators like the gray seals and also white sharks, which are apex predators. And you know, we had folks that were injured by white sharks. We had that death back in 2018. And that really highlighted the fact that we needed to have better information for folks.
So the power of fear is very powerful. What fear can drive people to do or to say is extreme. And that's exactly what happened during that time in 2018. So all the effort and energy that the White Shark Conservancy, the SEAL Consortium, and the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance were doing sort of came to this tipping point of what are we going to do, how do we communicate, and how do we actually address the misperception and miscommunication and outright just false information that was coming out through media. So it was a big task, and actually looking through what had been said at that time in 2018 is why I call it a kerfuffle, is there was so much happening that was just being on the defense of what was coming out and not being able to be fast enough to come out with that correct information. So we all came together with the strategy of just working together.
It is absolutely unfortunate, and it's a tragedy when there is a human-shark interaction of any kind. They are incredibly rare. And when you look at some of the more specific ones, you know, looking at, one of the comparisons often given and talked about is, will sharks affect tourism here? And under that, we were able to see evidence that supported that people are still going to go to the beach. So there were questions directly asking, some of those things that we have heard in various places, concerns about how the changes in wildlife here are going to affect the tourism industry.
How do you remove fear? And it's through education. But you need to have people understand that value of education and how important that is to combat fear. And so all the data in the world won't get you there. You have to be able to listen to people.
So many people come here because of our wildlife. Whales were the top rated across the board, but then it was looking at the sharks and the seals, as people are being drawn to come here because they realize what a thriving marine environment we have here, and that this really is a destination to be able to come and see wild animals in their natural habitat.
I was pleasantly surprised to find that, everyone was generally in agreement that, nobody wants to see lethal management of these species, whether it be seals or sharks. And, there's a wider range of disagreement among different stakeholder communities. I think fishermen had the widest ranges of opinions on that topic, but still the general average was that the average result was that we did not want to see lethal management. So that means we have to think a little bit more creatively and critically about how we reduce the interactions between particularly seals and fishing gear. I think that's arguably of greatest concern to the fishermen.
I always like to tell people not to hold on to these beliefs of us and them, whether they're scientists or fishermen, and that we need to break those boxes down so that we can work together. And I feel like this study is a perfect example of that, that if you get the right people together, you can get data that's trusted across the board, across different attitudes, if you want to put it that way, because we trust each other. I would say the biggest misconception that maybe this study helped understand is that for a long time there's been a perception that seals and sharks are not wanted in this region, that people don't care about them or that they want them gone. There's been a lot of very you would say maybe end of the world, dire information coming about how dangerous these animals are and how there'll be no tourism and the negative impacts that these animals can have. When in actuality, what we found from the data is that there's great support, not just for these individual animals, but for the entire ecosystem and how important it is. And people know that these animals are very important to the entire ecosystem.
We're at a time right now where the ecology of the ocean is basically in flux. There's so many changes. And in this case, what we were really trying to pin down is how are people responding to the fact that both white sharks and seals are repopulating southeastern Massachusetts. They're rewilding this area.
When we are looking back over the history of the Cape in this region, and what we have and what we know about the wildlife in this region, the first thing I want to say is that, when we talk about a lot of this wildlife, they're not Cape Cod wildlife. They are part of a larger population within the Northwest Atlantic Ocean. Especially when we talk about white sharks, they're often referred to as the white sharks off Cape Cod, which implies they're Cape Cod white sharks. We know now through movement studies that they are part of a larger population that can go as far north as Canada and as far south as Florida.
I think, and I guess this is unsurprising in some ways, but the fishing community had sort of the widest amount of disagreement among themselves. There's a lot of different perspectives within the fishing community, and on the opposite end of the spectrum, the tourists tend to have sort of the narrowest level of, they were more in agreement with one another on some of those things with respect to values of wildlife.
It's in an ideal world, the outcome. I mean, for me, the changes that are happening in the ocean and the ecology of the ocean are, we're looking at just two species in a really complex system, right? I'm hoping that we can continue to do research, we can continue to look at these changes, whether it's from climate change or, new species that may be showing up due to warming waters.
It was really important to understand what people feel and think here, people that are tied to this area and understand the value for their own reasons in this region. And that includes those that depend on the ocean and the system for their livelihood in many different ways. So whether you're a fisherman, you're a tourist, or you live here, this area is important to you economically, socially, and that's the ties that really connect people here, is that they have this grounding in this place.
Yeah, ecosystems are like complicated machines, and there's so many moving parts. And, I think over as far back as recorded history, we've been kind of tinkering with that machine in some way by taking a little of this out or a little of that out. And sometimes we've taken a lot of something out and we've seen what happens. And, I think we're learning, as long as we want to take protein out of this system or extract other things out of it to eat or to otherwise use, or if we want to do other things in that machine or with that machine, the machine metaphor only goes so far. But, I think it's important that we be mindful of the fact that it's one big system with all these interconnected moving parts. And, you move something too far apart or you take something out that's important and it's going to drastically change. And a lot of times there's real unintended consequences to when we make a change to that system. We don't always predict what's going to happen. We think we might understand and we remove a predator and, we think that their prey is going to come back, but then another species moves in. It can only take so much strain. And, I do think we need to recognize the interconnectedness of all of those different pieces.
So from this study, we could figure out what are the missing pieces, what are we not addressing? And that's really rare to have, because oftentimes we're so far along in what we think we want to know, especially when it comes to perceptions, that we forget to kind of take a step back.
When you look at the results of the study, one of the pieces that came out of this study was across the board. All of the stakeholder groups were in that strongly agree category for having an appreciation and understanding of the importance of wildlife in this region.
Everything in our ocean has a role. We step into it thinking, what do we want that role to be as a human? But animals and plants and everything else in the ocean, they have their own thing figured out. So when we step in, it does alter what's happening in our ecosystem. And we have yet to understand the multitudes of interactions that we just don't understand yet.
You know, I think we're getting better at thinking more holistically, you know, thinking about ecosystems as a whole rather than cod or seals or sharks or different species at a time. We're moving in that direction. But you know, it's challenging to think so about such a complex system, and sometimes you just want to throw your hands up and say, oh, it's too complicated, we can't think of it this way. But we've got to keep moving in that direction, because it's not that simple, and time after time we've seen that just thinking about one thing at a time doesn't work. And even if that means more collaboration and more people working together, you know, we've got to keep moving in that direction and make sure we're asking the right questions.
And so it doesn't mean there isn't going to be some discourse or arguments, but that we can come to the table and have conversations. And that's the most important work ahead. And what I think everybody should be really proud about the work that's happened is that we could come to the table to have those discussions, and all the backside of the research that happened that nobody gets to see, which is what questions are we going to ask? Is that the right question? Will this be the data that we need to go ahead? Will this fulfill the questions that need to be asked so that we have that really good empirical data? And that's really important. So knowing that we can do that, to create a study like this, it gives so much hope for that fact that we can live together with these rebounding species together and people.
So I think there's absolute value to putting numbers and graphs to these surveys, and that's, I think, really important, because having quantitative data to back up an assertion is really valuable. But at the same time, I think it is really important to listen to the individual community voices, and there's so much information there, ideas can be generated there, and I think, you know, from those voices often come ideas for solutions to some of the challenges and problems we have.
You have to be able to hear their concerns and hear where that fear is coming from. And I think that, again, is what one of the biggest parts of this study is even just seeing this tempered feeling of, oh, that's data. Okay, I know what the truth is, I know what the facts are, and communicating that has been so important. But fear can really drive so many things without that clarity behind it about what is it that we're actually fearful of. What will happen to my income? What will happen to the fishing? What will happen to tourists coming to this area? And I think I'm so grateful to see us come to this. I don't know if it's the other side yet, but there's an understanding. We have information, we have beach signs, we have a way to communicate with people that hopefully reduces that fear and empowers them to have that information.